They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking.
Hi, this is Nikolai, and you're listening to my dad, Rafal, co-host James Jardine, and featuring Mr. Jim Tiller on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Plug in, listen up, and enjoy.
Deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we
were happy. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome down to Security Rabbit Hole to another edition of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. I am Raph. Jim is in the square above me if you're playing the at-home edition. I don't know. I'm going to start getting creative with these intros because otherwise it's just the same old intro.
Mix it up.
We all like the music, but you know. How you doing, Jim?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. I had a good weekend. It's now pouring down rain and cold again. So here in North Carolina, we can't make up what we want anymore. Is it summer? Is it winter? Is it spring?
It rained. It rained overnight. Yesterday it was 77 degrees and sunny. The rain delayed till about 11:30 p.m. and then it kind of drizzled and rained a little bit. It rained a little bit this morning for my kids' field day, which I got to go play out with them for a bit. And then, it's kind of chilly here, but I'm hoping that by the time spring break comes around next week, that this cold is just a distant memory because I'm heading up to your neck of the woods anyway. All right. Well, here's the hoping spring springs relatively soon. Ward, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks so much. Excited to be here.
All right. How about the obligatory bio and disclaimer?
Yeah. So disclaimer part is, I am an employee of ViStar Credit Union, but the opinions shared here are mine and mine alone. Do not reflect on my company. But so I'm excited to be here. I'm the VP of Identity and Endpoint Security for ViStar, and have made my bones and time in this over 20 years in the security community, making my tour of the Atlanta Fortune X companies. So enjoy the time and have a lot of good references, but we'll let the listeners be the judge of the opinions.
Yeah. So we wanted to talk about the idea of I guess maybe refocusing, rebuilding our focus in security to the human aspect of it. Give me the nickel tour of what that means in your opinion.
Yeah. So people are oftentimes and always the core of our security programs. We look at and structure much of what we do and our current evolution of security infrastructures and environments. The human aspect is really critical and important to understand and have the perception of how to do security. And it always relevantly relates back to the human aspect. Even if we're getting into infrastructure that is exploding into anywhere the human is, to the application interface and how we interact and interface and leverage the application infrastructure, a lot of it generally revolves back and correlates back to the human aspect and the people that we are trying to secure and enabling the security of our enterprise, our consumers, our customers, our members, as the real focus of security. And I recognize the challenge that that evolution has taken over time and giving those perspectives as it relates to our people aspect of our companies.
I'm thinking, we've I feel like we've had this conversation before.
Nothing new.
I was gonna say at some regular interval, we say, this approach to just, controls and technologies. And Jim, this kind of dovetails off our last conversation pretty well. Just isn't going to cut it. We need to think about how we do this centered around people and identities. and we have, there's a lot of good conversation topics and conversation points around it. How do you make that real? Like, how do you actually do it? And I think you're probably in the ideal role to come in and tell us about that and like give your opinion, because that is what you do. That's like literally the job. So give me an idea, because here's my caveat. Every time we do this, it seems like we're speaking with a vendor, and I'm a vendor on my day job too. So I'm just as guilty as anybody, because we have the job to do. But the vendors like to drive conversation around the user, and it's either UEBA or IDP or IDS or identity something or other. We talked about data, securing data, and identifying roles and all that. But like, that's from a vendor perspective. Tell me the practitioner perspective. How the hell do you make this work?
Yeah, so from practitioner side of things, it's changing the view and communication and how you measure. How are you evaluating the outcomes of your security controls, and how are you measuring the effectiveness of your tools? So much of it has been concentrated, especially for the last 10 years. As an author on the first NIST CSF, I'm a big proponent of CSF. It has taken hold, and I love to see how the outcomes of the cybersecurity framework have really just been adopted globally, if nothing else, at most security organizations. But that is very much a control framework perspective and execution, and doesn't necessarily correlate back to the people and the effectiveness of the controls as it is associated to the individuals of your organization. And are the controls actually stacked properly to enable the outcomes you're trying to achieve in the cybersecurity framework themselves? And so that's the piece that I'm looking at and really concentrated on. And it comes down to bringing in the identity view, bringing in the endpoint view. The endpoint is not just about EDR, it is also about the browser and browser activity, DLP. So you have all of these products and technologies that are functionalized and concentrated around the individual and what the individual is doing, but they don't always correlate back to one another. And they're being tracked as it relates specifically to a framework, not the individual. And so that's really the concentration that I'm excited about and working on and focus on, is saying, let's take the individual and make it relevant to the business teams. Because you have this abstractness around this cybersecurity framework when you communicate to the board, when you communicate to the executive team, and you try to make these connections. But if you talk about their team members, it becomes real. It becomes real fast. And those are the pieces that I think really can be brought back in and given a different perspective on context, on controls, on opportunity, because now you're making it personal and individual for the business leaders, not just inherently trying to report on how are we doing on our control environment.
So what's different in terms of how you what you implement and how you implement when it, controls framework versus moving it towards a user-centric model? What is fundamentally different in the user-centric model that is not there in the way we're doing it today?
Yeah, so it's not to say today and how we're doing it is right or wrong. A lot of it is, are you bringing that information to a framework or a stack that is focused on the individual themselves, or considering or parallel to the individual, and understanding how those controls are being effective, but also giving yourself perspective of where are your human threats, not just so it comes back to the insider threat piece. You're informing on threats. You're doing a threat evaluation and understanding and perspective around the individuals in your environment and who are the more risky entities. Do you need to control them better? Do you need to control them differently from an identity standpoint? Do you need to do step-up authentication? Do you need to do hardware tokens? Or do you need to see how their devices are acting? They may have a multitude of different devices. So it's all the pieces in creating a picture of the individuals themselves. This is the benefit that we are now, that we've not had a lot in the past, is data. These are all data points, data perspectives, data opportunities to inform on the individual and report and then correlate up accordingly to how our businesses operate. And that's the real piece for me, is it's making it tangible to the business and the business teams of what security is to them, not just what we are doing from a control aspect in our little box of security greatness.
So this is one of those times where I kind of feel dumb. I'm trying to take what you're saying and kind of build, like, paint a picture, because I'm on the practitioner side, I guess you might want to say, right? So, I work for a company where we make stuff, right? We got machines that cut things and bend and all that kind of good stuff. So I think the part is, to me, it's multidimensional. And I was just going to ask you a question, and I think you hit one of them dead spot on, and it kind of made the light go off when you started mentioning like higher risk users, or maybe MFA them differently or more often, or maybe they're coming from a different system. I'm like, okay, now I'm starting to get where you're coming from an individualist perspective. But take that next step with me, because I feel like I'm getting what you're saying. I'm just trying to picture it in my mind a little bit better. Yeah. So for example, when you say, like, I'll struggle with a lot of like somebody wants to do something, they're in sales or whatever group they're in, and they want to do something, and our security policy won't let them do it. Right. So it becomes like this whole, who's the police, who's really in control, yada, yada, yada. So that individualistic aspect of it. And then each, as you are surely aware, all these different business units have their own kind of culture, right? Some are free flowing. So as you come down from the business in those board level conversations and work up from the individual, how are you making it synthesized so that you're not in a situation where you're calling out the VP of shipping or, this because they have Tony on their team keeps, clicking on bad links, right? There's got to be something in between that you're doing.
Yeah, no. And that is the piece where, honestly, I've seen the biggest challenge for us to leverage. If you don't have the data analytics chops on the team, it is more difficult. I want to be very clear in this. And it's part of the thing that I've been working on with a number of my partners to start including and build on top of. We're starting to see, you get pieces of it a little bit in XDR capabilities. Sure, if someone wanted to go big data and focus on a Power BI or an analytics platform, then you can really take advantage of it and truly communicate it. And I've done that at previous organizations. But it is paramount that the vendors and partners start to think this way too. And that's really where I'm struggling. I'll be honest. That's part of the reason why I bring this topic up, because I am struggling to get the data out in a way that is correlated to individuals. And that way we can report effectively. We can show this. And that is the merriment that you're kind of suggesting. It is a challenge, Jim, is where do we get to where we're trying to achieve this approach, but we have our technologies and there's a gap. And, so whether it's a lot of the EDR, obviously embedded, it's inherent there, but you get into technologies like the browsers. If you're trying to do browser related reporting and activity and DLP, it's a little bit harder, honestly, to get it out of Microsoft in a individual correlated way and in the log data and being able to build this. So I'm also thinking of some identity platforms. We're thinking of, it's identity, right? We have the human aspect already there. They are performing the action, but yet it's really hard sometimes in certain products to actually correlate back to the individual of what the failure was. We'll see the failure state. We'll see the error that occurred between the systems, but not associated to the individual and the objective that was trying to be achieved, to understand, is it an issue of risk or is it an issue of individual, and actually going back to maybe an IT issue at that point.
So you just kind of made this real for me, because as you were talking about getting the data out, and I was like, where's he going with this? And then you just kind of like bonked me in the head with that, some clarity. You're right. Yeah. When I'm thinking of like the types of log files we get, Jim, their IP addresses, their MAC addresses, their system names.
Ugh,
They're processing it.
boring.
But if you're like, hey,
Yeah.
tell me everything Ward did today. Most of the log files, even the platforms that are supposed to do that for you, your friendly neighborhood 17th next gen, ultra modern, 5th generation AI powered, now with XDR goodness sim in the cloud with Data Lake, still struggles to build this, because in the detective and response tools that think this way, they'll give it to you, but most of them don't.
Well, they treat the human. Sorry, I got to jump in.
Yeah, go.
Right? They treat the human like it's a computer, right? So we get all this information about computers. So they treat the identity as like a technical bundle, like a computer. So, for example, as you're looking in a system, I won't mention the name of the system, and you're trying to figure out what's Tony doing in the last 3 months, kind of thing, right? But also, Tony is logging in, but these are like automatic activities. You mentioned like browser. So always behind the scene things that are just, okay, that's great, but it's not telling me what Tony's trying to do. What did he do? When did he do it necessarily in a cohesive way? Absolutely.
Yeah, and then what was the control breakdown? That's the other piece of that that really is important to me. Where is the control breakdown, and is it to some extent, is it intent or accidental? And that's where you start getting into a different view of your security controls that is gapped in the traditional model. Because we implement the controls, we say, yep, oh, look, I see a green light on that device over there. It's making its blinky blinky. And therefore, it's got to be working, right? It's got to be working. It's got to be doing its thing. But we're not really capturing effectiveness as much. And when you start looking at it at a human level and a human perspective as a result, you get that different view and understanding of the effectiveness of the control and the outcomes, because it can just be accidental. You can just have, it may not be malicious, of all of these failure attempts to log in. It could just be that someone really has maybe it's a keyboard that's missing, or maybe they just really are crappy at typing.
It'd be nice to have a record of that too, so I can say, hey, pick person name here. They tend to have problems typing in their password. I mean, it could be just that simple. And we can build these characterizations around networks and systems and all this kind of stuff, but building it around a human is arguably very difficult. Let's call it duck a duck.
Yep.
But you could say that's the last mile in this challenge, right?
And I want to be clear, I am seeing entities start to do this. This isn't something that it's like, oh, no one does it. I am absolutely, and I'm utilizing products that are taking this mentality and this perspective. And it's really great whenever you can start getting into integrated approaches where you have your EDR that will integrate and bring in through SCIM your identity parts and infrastructure and information, and start being able to go, oh, look, we're actually seeing and understanding the threat. We're seeing a lot of the EDR players over the last number of years do this similar thing. We're going to add in a risk qualifier. And this is really where it starts coming in. We're giving you this risk assessment based on the activities we see and understand about the entities all of a sudden. And it doesn't have to be the system entity. It can be the individual entity. And that's really where I want to just continue to build on, and bringing in those correlations to understand the risk level and determine that risk view of the individual. But then you have to do something with it. And this is where it's a passion for me, is you've got to make it relevant to the business team. You got to make it relevant to the executive leaders and senior leaders, because that's where it translates into adoption and support for the security program. And at the core, that's what we all want to scream and yell about constantly, is we just want support. We want to see the table. We need funding to do these things. But how well are we translating that back to our business partners, and what is the effect on them? You may have it from for the purposes of phishing tests. Okay, cool. They don't always embrace that. Maybe from a third-party risk management program. Oh, here's your vendor, and here's the exposure you have from your vendor, from my checklist that they took 3 years to fill out. Isn't it great? But you start going and saying, hey, here's your individuals and how they're actively behaving and how they are achieving their control state that we are measuring against and hitting targets on. we have an objective, we have a purpose in measuring these things and relating that back and going, here's your organizational view of your security. It creates a different conversation opportunity to address these controls in a way that is different. And especially when we're getting into MFA, especially when we're getting into privilege access. These are the pieces that, again, are important to me because everything going SaaS, so much of our infrastructure and technology is going SaaS. The business team is the owner, closer and closer and closer, and they're affecting the outcomes of the user community and their employees.
It seems like a monumental task because
that's where my head's
like
at,
you mentioned, I mean, not to state the obvious, but
Yep.
I mean, first of all, let's understand that there's a boundary that exists with technology capability, right? One could argue that all technology is bound within sort of a ring of capability, right? It's the exact inverse of a human, right? A human is infinitely capable of all kinds of things. I mean, right? I mean, they can think of something, they have imagination, they can do different things the way they want, right? And so you mentioned like earlier, the browser, right? Just getting control over browsing or just getting visibility into that. First, you got to go, well, am I going to limit you to just Edge, right? Or am I going to let all my users do Google and Edge and Brave and have whatever they want? Okay, now I just took my problem and exponentially increased it. And then you get into like, well, am I going to let them use my password manager in Google, or am I going to make them use password manager like a third party? Or, I mean, just dealing with the tiniest little things. And guess what? None of those systems are really going to talk to each other. If you're in an Azure environment and you're running 365, it does not care very much that you're running Google, and Google sort of doesn't care about giving you information. So it's like you have a domainal challenge, the human challenge combined with, Apple and Google are not going to talk to Microsoft, and Microsoft's not going to talk to Apple, kind of thing, and it's just, everything you said makes total sense. I like exactly how you're sort of framing it, but as I lean back, I'm going, my goodness, this is a big challenge.
So can I follow up? Because I want to ask a question on top of what Jim just said, is to kind of put the point on the arrow is, how do you take that, what you're trying to accomplish? And I don't want any company secrets here. Like, how do you actually do that in a way with the what's available to you today, right? How do you actually do that? Because that starts. What sort of magic chance in a back room with lit candles you got going on there?
Start with what you have, right?
Yeah,
it's the easiest part. To start with what you have, and you've been doing these controls. I'm not trying to state that you've got to throw out your security program and restate it and redesign it completely. Leverage what you already have done and really make it tangible to the business organization, and that's really where my concentration is making that tangibility, that feeling, that embrace and accountability starts to happen. And so if you've already determined, ideally you've already determined, so back to what you were saying there, Jim, around browsers. Ideally, you've had that conversation, you've done that risk analysis of how exposed are we on the browser? What controls do we need on the browser to protect our organization? Do we need DLP there? Do we need password management there? Are we doing it in a different third-party product? You've already made those decisions to some extent. And from there you go, great, let's bring that in. Let's understand what that means to our enterprise so we understand how the operators are executing their days and involving and interacting with their business teams and involved with business data. So it's bringing that perspective back to what you're asking, Raf, it's understanding and taking what you already have and start there. Don't recreate anything. Just understand how these pieces work together. And honestly, as I mentioned earlier, what if your products actually can collaborate together? Are your teams, are your security organizational teams talking to understand that, hey, maybe you have a operations team and you've got your engineering team and they have different products. Great. Are you bringing in the data and correlating the products? Are you working with your IT team to bring in the AD data into any individual product that you have, like EDR or otherwise? So looking for those opportunities and having the conversations. with your vendors. I mean, that's really where it starts to occur, is understanding where your opportunities are and knowing when you have something, start reporting in that way. Build out those pieces. Maybe it starts with just your simulation, your tax sim, and doing phishing exercises and otherwise, and viewing it in a way that isn't just about system name, but to the individuals themselves. Start there. There's a perspective of threat that you can communicate to your business teams and your business leaders and get them to understand in a way of what does security mean to them and their operators and their employee and their team, to go, am I comfortable with this? Is this what I want? Do I want something different? And at least get them to ask the question, how can I get something different from the security team that I desire? Because maybe I'm not okay with this. I don't know that I'm not okay with this yet, but it doesn't feel right. So let's have a conversation. And that introduces the next steps of progression around trying to solve for the problems. Is not just the, hey, here's my CSF progression, or here's my controller, here's my audit, I failed something. Because great, those are things that aren't going to change in the near future. They're really core, good parts of the program. But being able to relate your program back to your peers at a senior leadership level is really, really helpful.
Does this then bifurcate your security approach to systems and machines and humans? Not to say that they're different. It's just the lenses are different. The technology, like what data you want, right? Does that cause a problem? One, is that the case? Is that what we're talking about here? And two, what does that do to how you actually, do you get different views into the same data? Do you get different data, or do you run?
Absolutely. I mean, the systems are already communicating in a way that is relevant to their technology and how they designed it, right? So your, from an NDR perspective, just saying, you were looking at that cross-functional network infrastructure and systems and the communications between systems and technologies, not necessarily at an individual level or a human level. You're looking at systems communicating in many cases and how that activity is. Maybe you get some visualization and understanding of the human aspect of it, but in many cases, you're looking and correlating off of system communications and standardizations on the network itself. So can you apply it? Maybe you can't, and maybe that's okay, but it's looking at where you can apply it and building it off of that, because it's relevant to, again, the leadership to understand what is their involvement in security. And it's not just about ITs, or it's not just about the security organization's responsibilities to communicate and make security tangible to them. This is how you have that conversation effectively without just going, okay, here's NIST-CSF, or here's our failed audit findings. We have to do this, so you're on the ride with me of the have-tos. It's the want-tos.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, I'm picking up what you're putting down, man. And I got to tell you, I've always felt, for better or for worse, and there have been times when I'm like, yeah, no way. There have been times like, yes, I say, people are smart.
Yeah.
I try to, and there are times when they desperately tried to prove you wrong. But the point you're making about making it personal and making it like, how does this affect here, Amy, you need to do this differently, because this is kind of how it affects your world. Let me give you an example, right? And you kind of go from being corporate law to how can I be a helping hand so, your children or your grandparents don't get exposed to fraud, and, and it's all of a sudden it just completely changes the dial, right? Yeah. And what you've done is you're approaching this as I would not say in a corporate way, but I would say, but with business in mind, you're approaching this as culture, but not the big fluffy culture, but more actually getting down
tangible,
what I'm saying?
Relevant.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So
don't get me started.
Yeah. So Jim, one last point, because we're out of time, but I want to add I got one thing I got to pose to you. One more question, because we're talking about, Jim, what you just said, personalizing it to the individual, maybe to the team. How do you do that at enterprise scale?
Yeah, so I love that you asked that, because that is the part that frustrates me to no end when I try to get data out. So let's take the example of I'm going to take the very tactical example of saying your simulation exercise. So you've got this simulation exercise, you've got this product that is sending out emails and understanding and tracking, and you got the view, and you have all these individuals. And then so frequently I have seen products that don't allow you to report on what is in AD. You are ingesting, you're integrating for single sign-on, and you have this profile that is set with their department, with their manager, with their leaders, but yet none of that is available in the product to report from. And you have to rebuild the reporting to relate it back to the business team. Make my life easy here. Like, this is exactly what the intent and the sales approach is now you can, report this way, but yet when I extract it, it's not there. And that's really the core of this, is that it's getting the capabilities and the products that are visualized and understood in a human way, not just an event activity way.
Yeah, man, you nailed it.
Hey, Jim, I think this gives us an opportunity where maybe I get you back, because I've got a follow-up conversation coming with Head Kovitz, the guy that we talked identity security with. Now he's got a product behind him, Silverfort. So but the first conversation was really like, we asked what the hell is identity security? I think this one might be more like, if we do a follow-up, and I've got one coming up with him, because I wanted to do another one with him. Or do you want to jump in? Because I think you might actually have some questions that I'd like to hear his answers to as a vendor. Like, how do you actually, hey, you say it's like the security of identities and of people. I have questions. Yeah.
And actually I used to be, I've brought in Silverfort at previous organizations. So maybe familiar with the product.
Okay. So then this will be a fun follow-up. All right.
Yeah.
We got customer, we got product manager. Let's see what Rumble.
Royal Rumble. All right. Informative. 30 minutes, 32 minutes. Thanks. I appreciate that. I was a little skeptical that we'd heard this before. I'm happy to say the report that I feel like I was wrong, because you gave me something different than I'd been thinking about. And that is how do we get the data? How do we actually get the data to show the individual actions and impact and behaviors, and what you should then extrapolating what you can do differently and how you can teach, right? But we're still, I think, missing the at scale part, which is maybe somebody solves, but I think that's an interesting perspective. I'll give you the final word. Anything you want to leave people with?
Yeah, no. So I think, the core here is go back and test it out. Test out your scenario. But the biggest piece here that I would actually recommend is not to say test it out for one team. Test it out between two of your teams. Have two of your teams collaborate and bring in their data into a view that is relevant at the human level, and try to see what it means and determine what are you missing, because you may identify that you have a gap in your control stack that you weren't seeing because you were focused on appropriately so here's our framework, and let's go down our framework and make sure that we have something plugged in. But now if you look at it from how are my operators executing, how are my employees operating on their day in business, then you might see that you're actually missing something on a level that you kind of want to get better visibility into. All
right. Well, that's that. Guys, thanks for listening. Ward, thanks for joining us. This has been fun. We're going to get you back, because there's a continuation of this. Jim, always appreciate the insights. I think I say this a lot, but if you've heard me say it before, I like the fact that the reason I do this show, the reason this thing started, the reason it continues through 600 and coming up on 650 episode is I learned something. Like, we sit here and we talk, and sometimes we just have fun, but more often than not, I come away with I didn't know that before, and this one was no different. I hope you feel the same way. If you do, leave us a quick review, maybe a comment on iTunes, or it's how people find us. The more of those you leave, ratings you leave, the more, and whatever platform you're in, by the way, whether you're in you're some podcast viewer, RSS feed, or iTunes, whatever, the more reviews you leave for us, the more the systems help other people find us. So I'm going to be on a bit of a campaign to get some of you guys to do that. love it or hate it. Hey, let's hear it. So, yeah, that's what I got. Thanks for listening, you guys. We'll catch you guys another time, another place, on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. That's it for now. We'll see you later.
This is Bella. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to leave my dad a review and share this with your friends. Bye.